Chapter 2, Identity. Trying to identify the black man or to get them to uniformly identify themselves is quite complicated. The cause of this complication is his overall unfamiliarity with his exact origin, aims, and purpose. Some of them spew various definitions and views about who they are. Over the past 50 years or so, they have changed their titles several times. So it is obvious that they are periodically undecided about who they are and unable to settle on a word that aptly portrays who they wish to be. They have been called niggers, nigras, or negras, and claims that they do not like this label. They still tend to use the term with each other, vacillating between using it to express fondness or as an insult. Later, they referred to themselves as colored. By order of the more educated among them, they settled for Negro for a short time. As years passed, they outlined another reference contrary to their previous position of claiming they hated the term. They, after much prompting, preferred to be recognized as black. As the years progressed and they became more politically astute, they selected the modern term of Afro American. Their latest preference is to answer to being an African American or just African. He does not seem to be primarily concerned with locating the place of his beginning. He seemingly is satisfied with setting on an African continent as his homeland. Excuse me. He seemingly is satisfied with settling on the African continent as his homeland. It has proven impractical to question them as a group regarding their identity, and the closest they come to being unified is to collectively state, I am a black man, and they deem this answer to be sufficient to define, for their women and the world, who they are and what their needs consist of. Obviously, this system of vague explanation has not worked. Any cohesiveness he has tried to have regarding his identity usually remains within eclectic geographical areas of inner cities and tends to stay confined within these bounds, recognized and known only to the community inhabitants. He has been so excited about his physical freedom for the past 35 years or so that he feels no compulsion to study or gain knowledge about how his slave history impacts on his current behavior. This is strange indeed, since most academians agree that a knowledge of one's history makes life more valuable. It puts control on negative actions and allows sane choices to be made according to the potentialities available to a person with a certain kind of background. He has chosen to skip a detailed study of what happened to him during slavery. This study should be performed not for blamability on the perpetrators, but to debrief himself and rid his subconscious of any psychological emasculation resulting mentally or genetically from that experience. An experience that has so devastating that its latent memory has seemingly contaminated his sperm and deranged him from rendering him unable to even think himself out of his misery. His rantings about being proud to be black runs in what is now becoming a predictable pattern. He tried to recognize his identity in the 20s and 30s, tried again in the 60s and 70s, and approaching his third therapeutic purge in the 90s. Each generation unavoidably feels the frustrating pains of unresolved conflicts left unattended by their predecessors. They want answers. Youthful black males are starting to crave information and public acknowledgement of his African culture. What is culture? Some say culture is a system of preserving historical social ideas, traditions, memorabilia, and basic principles by which a people live. Culture contains rites, qualifying tests, and other values passed from one generation to the next who are emotionally connected by nationality, including skin color. Culture serves the purpose of functioning as a moral compass to direct and monitor people to keep them on the right track to preserve their ideas. Using this definition, it is plain to see that the black man is not earnestly trying to adopt his black culture. In fact, he is far from it. His definition of culture has become a stew pot filled with a smorgasbord of unharmonious ideas and practices that so far have only inspired a few black men to wear African clothes, a kente cloth scarf, fezes, ethnic jewelry, or slogan t shirts. As usual, many of them are starting to express their dissatisfaction angrily. They are not really hostile, but they feel like their ego has been damaged, or that they have been punked out in front of the whole world for not getting what they think they deserve and what they have been fighting for. They are an overly sensitive emotional group, so they derive short-lived surge of power from talking rough to non-blacks in authority. Next, he says he wants to reclaim his righteous character. So what is character? Character is a gradual process of development guided by specific attitudes, philosophy, ethics, and a clear sense of right and wrong. It must first be planted in an individual by the mother and cultivated on a daily basis. It preferably should be endorsed by the father and recognizable in the surrounding community. The black man has not had the benefit of these interpersonal systems, so it is no great wonder that adult black men do not possess similar recognizable traits of character. Their behavior and practices have been developed from a conglomeration of foreign ideas he has been surrounded with since birth, so he has been unable to settle on a definite scope of black male characteristics. And he has wasted an entire generation being indecisive and unorganized, resulting in no establishment of traits for himself or his now unruly offspring. Instead, he has spent the last 40 years trying to find work, himself, and a mate while experimenting with opposite ideas. He spent money on the side trying to have a good time. According to the study, the biggest breakdown of any sensible character values, as vague as they may seem today, occurred in the 1960s. This period of the black man's life signaled a change in his priority schedule and a reorganization of traditional and basic social practices. Little beknownst to him, the 1960s also provided him with the last platform he would ever have to design plans to ensure he and his family of having a prosperous and praiseworthy future, and he blew it. His children today, especially the sons of these black men, have never been told about what happened during that time or of the political and permanent ramifications of the lifestyle choices made by their parents. It must now be explained to them so that they can understand how and why the black man wound up in this current condition. These same sons must start a tradition of holding each previous generation of black men accountable for the collective efforts towards progress and survival. They ought to examine any previous mistakes and focus on improving those areas. It is pointlessly futile for each oncoming generation to have to start back at square one trying to repair the exact or worse conditions endured by their predecessors. None of the problems are new, yet no evaluation is ever made on the feasibility of the typical solutions used to better the overall quality of life for African American peoples. The reason this has never been done is due to the disunity among black men from coast to coast. This has kept them stuck in a stage of bickering about who, what, when, where, and how. They haven't addressed the commonality of obstacles that all blacks face daily. The early 1960s are chosen as a starting point of eras for black men because it was during this era when all Americans, white and non white, were embroiled in issues inspiring tremendous emotional upheavals in personalities and lifestyles. New ideas surfaced at frightening speed, and new trends developed almost daily. Whites were busy tussling with the police in the streets, rebelling against the Vietnam War. They had publicly discovered drugs and sex, and were showcasing their artistic flower child campaign and organizing on campus to protest for peace. On another level, white women were gearing up for the women's liberation movement to struggle against unfair treatment in the workplace, in the home, and in their personal relationships. White men were in an unusual tizzy about their women burning their bras, abandoning the kitchen, and not having their dinner ready when they got home from work. American soldiers were dying in rapid numbers in a war that emerged as making no sense at all, and literally volumes of European values, formerly uncontested, were being replaced with new, sometimes outrageous, and often immoral behaviors supposedly rooted in freeing up the inner self for the pursuit of individual satisfaction. White boys of draftable age created for the first time in America a climate which prompted others to say no to requests placed upon them by the government and the nation. Their refusal to fight in the Vietnam War represented the first major issue that put the government and the people at odds against each other. The breaking of this tie and the survival of those who declined to obey signaled a new option for anyone who preferred to maintain individual choices or opinions about every aspect of daily living. Youth started to reject and refuse many of the values their parents had maintained throughout their entire life. It was a new day. The civil rights movement, such as it was called, began exploding. Black men sprouted voices, and long suppressed complaints were finally noisily announced. Several surfaced as makeshift bargain basement leaders expounding new theories of action to obtain rights and benefits of living in America. White women and girls commenced to join the civil rights protests and for the first time function in close, intimate contact openly with black men. Their presence drew the attention of the black men, and interracial sexual involvements milked much of their energy and reduced their anger at all whites considerably. His expanding ideas incorporated his wardrobe too. In the grassroots units, they began to wear African symbols, while others adopted this absurd flair of Superfly, a popularized fictional black pimp. They sported the Afro hairstyle, a kind of rounded bouffant look, and danced to good music in a flurry of new nightclubs and social spots. The excitement was kept aflame with new words like honky and pigs, echoing from the parched throats of black men. Other words contained demands for freedom and justice and equality. He also beckoned for recognition, integration, and acceptance. He did not know that the difference between those two sets of requests were as opposite as night and day. Black men were creating their own stimuli to help them throw off the yoke of racism and self incrimination they had slept with for over 100 years. The revolutionary mobs roaming the streets, inciting spontaneous ghetto rebellions, rewarded him with TV sets, stereos, couches, lamps, and other items captured by vandalizing local merchant businesses, all of which were blamed on racism. President John F. Kennedy sent the first troops to Vietnam, which turned out to be a bottomless pit demanding thousands of recruits shipped daily to feed its fury. The anti war protests were staged mostly by college age white males who didn't want to fight. Black men hungrily bit into new ideas and swallowed morsels and tidbits of principles and attitudes taken from several sources existing as new options. The uninterrupted ability to make these choices created in him a sort of cultural shock. He was emotionally set free, not psychologically but emotionally. He was free to feel any kind of reaction about a variety of standards and responsibilities. Plus, he could act on his choices, and he could endorse or abstain on any situation he encountered. Many European establishments let him in, and it was likened to being turned loose in Disney World. The wonders of an integrated society never cease. He dove in, and his woman and children followed. Few of them realized that the decisions they were on the brink of making would stifle their development and progress for untold years to follow. Few of them realized that the decisions that they were on the brink of making would stifle their development and progress for untold years to follow. He chose to carve himself out a new identity, one forged out of the new freedoms the white people were experimenting with, and one based on the expected benefits the civil rights leaders had promised would be forthcoming. From that moment, and at every juncture since, he established no national agendas or formats to involve the masses of blacks in united progress. He virtually regressed and reacted as his ancestors did during a big slavery breakout. The slaves scattered in all different directions to become absorbed into existing lifestyles and blend in with the scenery. So they all went in different directions to pursue disconnected, unrelated self-survival goals. No thoughts or plans were given to the future and how they were woozy with the hallucinations created by the slight improvements generated by the civil rights movement, and believed that many of their grievances were settled in the process of being settled or would fade away in due time. Based on this kind of faulty, pie in the sky, promised land misinterpretation, the black man selected one of the following paths. 1. Went to college or trade school and pursued education. 2. Joined the civil rights industry. 3. Signed up for the military, went to Vietnam or traveled. 4. Accepted a position to work inside the system. 5. Became an outspoken political leader of the times. 6. Aligned himself with one of the popular ethnic organizations. 7. Became an artist, poet, actor, or entertainer. 8. Got high, dropped out completely, or turned to crime. 9. Developed a lifestyle firmly rooted in the imaginary benefits of social integration. 10. Built a life based on the rules, traditions, and values of European culture and became an ordinary Joe, an unconcerned Negroid. The results of these choices are as follows. 1. Pursuit of education. Black men who chose educational pursuit or entrepreneurship have fared moderately well. They prepared themselves to qualify to apply for better paying jobs which provide them with hospitalization, life insurance, retirement plans, a routine work schedule, or paychecks. Others formed their own business and laid the foundation for the development of hair products, publications, funeral homes, insurance agencies, and law and medical professions. They became examples of achievement, overcame barriers, and delved deeply into qualifying themselves to be at that time what was known as a credit to his race. Still others worked in professional capacities for white-owned firms and delivered to them the finest ideas and creativity that the black mind could conceive. They established a system of class distinction among other blacks, a separation based on high earnings called the upper class or well-to-do families. They felt completely removed from the problems and concerns of the less qualified blacks they left behind. Many of them are quite surprised today to learn that so much time has passed and they have so little to show for it. Because of their imitation of success according to European prerequisites, they alienated themselves and lost their identities on another level. They started to believe that they were just a person and equal to any other person, no matter what color. They took up tennis, skiing, boating, bridge, and private social clubs. 2. Joined the civil rights industry. These black men soared high in the public eye for quite a while. They were portrayed as charging warriors working on the front line for desegregation of public facilities, sexual integration, and social reform. They received many spotlights for their involvement and were always happy to prove their bravery during protests and took pride in announcing their arrests. They were fiery speakers, available spokespersons, and delighted in outlining political strategies to reach their goals. They played on the emotionalism of the people, white and black, and believed that if blacks were permitted to infiltrate white-owned businesses, industry, education, and neighborhoods, that they would prove themselves qualified to function on every other level. They thought that the removal of the above barriers and unencumbered entrance into the gateways of white American life would allow blacks to be accepted as equals. They sought employment and personal involvement with whites and agreed that voting rights were the major key to blacks' future security in the USA. Today, black men who fostered these ideas as a platform to become a national leader are few in number. Many have disappeared due to death, burnout, ego damage brought on by rejection, or their eventual failure to convince whites, either through the courts or fervor-filled dialogue, that blacks deserve special attention and favors. They aligned themselves with President John Kennedy and his brother Bobby, but soon their scripts ran out. Public attention waned and their presence became unwelcomed. Many went on to organize national agencies founded on loosely related principles of the civil rights movement, and these too ultimately faded from powerlessness and their inability to re-inspire the desperate displays of emotion required to maintain their platforms. They are rarely even mentioned anymore. One or two remain as representative of the entire group. They too are disappointed. They grew few permanent fruits from their labors. The benefits they pleaded for are today found to be lacking in helping blacks attain food, clothing, and shelter. But they did make it possible for blacks to spend their money in any white-owned establishment they please. 3. Joined the military. Back in the day, joining the service appeared as an honorable option for many black men. They were raised to be patriotic, so going off to fight in a war they were told would defend their country and maintain their democratic way of life appealed to their need to be responsible for getting a job done. It also gave them an opportunity to take training courses, prove their physical abilities, and work as a team with other men. They perceived the military as a gigantic masculine club where they could compete, shoot guns, travel, meet women, earn pay, send a stipend home, gain veterans benefits, medical care, extra points on civil service tests, VA loans, college grants, and of course, the special pride of wearing their uniform to church and walking around in their neighborhoods. It additionally provided them with a process which they had to qualify to go through and earn recognition and respect for passing various tests in a man's domain, the war. Some protested the war in Vietnam while others praised their involvement, and if they survived, came home bragging about their war conquests. If they had any doubts about their citizenship before they went in, by the time they came out of boot camp, they were true Americans, firm in their inclusion as being useful, needed, and trained. Military practice included skill mastery of their weapons and duties, which gave them confidence in their ability to fight for their country. As usual, for many black men, military service further alienated them from their true nature, culture, and character. They had to become unified with American ideals in order to enlist, and they had to be totally mentally committed beyond testable doubt of their allegiance to Old Glory and all it stood for. They also saw participation in the war as a way to prove they were willing to join forces with white boys and fight for the country they all loved. Today, those who suffered near mortal injury have their aching disabilities to remind them of that involvement. Some wound up mentally ill due to shell shock or Agent Orange. Others, bound by encapsulated memories of the vivid horrors of war, just never recovered from the ordeal. The black men found that he did not have the killing nature of their Anglo-Saxon comrades and were not accustomed to destroying people who had not personally offended them. Initially, they tried, as they had been trained, to view the Viet Cong as evil and a threat to their free way of life. But soon they concluded that the war was unorganized and that they were being shoved to the front lines and promptly being killed. The black men had never as a group ever been mad enough to fight anybody, less known a yellow man who lived on the other side of the world. And they also realized that racial prejudice, segregation, and rejection based on his color was thriving strong and well in the military ranks. He became disillusioned, and his disillusionment contributed to the internal strife already brewing among the Negro troops and his objections, not necessarily to the Vietnam War, but to his presence in it. eventually got him expelled or dismissed, accused of cowardice. His next surprise came when he got back home. And after a quick flurry of praise and center attention from his neighborhood cronies, and the rapt attention he received from his family while reciting war story, things went back to normal. He couldn't find work, he had bad dreams of guilt, and his mind kept returning to war scenes where his own fear had made him shudder, retch from bile in his throat, or lose control of his bowels. He felt angry and used. Uncle Sam had let him down. He was out of sync with the times, and people got tired of hearing the same stories over and over. He was disappointed. The war had taken complete control of his mind and body and would take him years to recover. Thousands lost their lives or limbs. The Vietnam War started in 1969 and lasted approximately 15 years. President Lyndon B. Johnson inherited it from President Kennedy after he was assassinated, but it remained an undeclared war. The government never wanted to admit it, but America lost that war. The negative public opinion about the war from American citizens at home deprived the new veterans of any special help they might have received, and the silent majority just wanted to forget the war and the soldiers who they had heard had killed innocent women and children. All mothers of draftable age sons were furious with the government for killing their boys in a useless cause they didn't understand. Acceptance of politically affiliated jobs in the system. 4 and 5. Some black men took advantage of their new attention and became involved in the political systems existing in the halls of government. They believed that their political views would permit them to be instrumental in making and passing laws to help black people. They figured out how to qualify in local, state, and federal politics and invaded the White House. Politics gave them a place to vent their opinions, allowed them to be included in social affairs connected to their party, and gave them a stage to perform on. On local levels, of black men were rumored to having been bought out by the grassroots or militant struggles by being offered a high-paying job or some other leadership position in one of the newly formed agencies designed for blacks under the Anti-Poverty Act. They accepted community posts where they operated job training programs, distributed goods and services, housing, daycare, free clinics, parks, pools, school improvements, playgrounds, and other outreach programs. These institutions were actually feeble, post-riot attempts to be reparations of a sort to make up to blacks for the many denials recently pointed out during the civil unrest. Having a steady paycheck proved to be a soothing balm to the wounds of racism and silenced a lot of loudmouths who canceled on complaining to spend their new money. Some of them worked in these anti-poverty programs for years. The names of the jobs often changed depending on the administration in office. These jobs were filled by the educated and the uneducated, conservatives, moderates, and liberals among black men. As the popularity of civil disobedience waned, the effectiveness of the black man leaders subsided, and they unexpectedly collided with new federal or state administrators who canceled funding based on new studies they claimed proved that their jobs were a sham and hadn't really improved the quality of life for the people they were appointed to serve. Their clientele became ungrateful and demanding and comfortably dependent on the free services they thought would last forever. Black men placed in charge of such programs had a wide variety of individual control over the operation of their sites. Many of them were not really qualified to be CEOs, and their lack of expertise shortly slumped into boredom, and they began to view their jobs as just an easy way to rip off the system and earn some easy money. Others learned how to file for grants, understand line items, and received budgeted sums to implement their community ideas. Later, when they became embittered about being fired, they ceased any efforts to help the people entrusted to their care due to disappointment in the striving human spirit they believe existed in the people. They found out that the people were lazy, ungrateful, vindictive, and greedy, and the furthest thing from their minds was becoming free and independent if they had to give up their entitlements. There was much panic and scrambling for the last-minute morsels of government jobs. Some of these black men went on to city hall, city council, mayorships, congressional reps, and other political service-oriented jobs. The black man had become confident in his ability to negotiate with whites. Today, the storm clouds crouching on the horizon threatens the removal of or disqualification of black man candidates from all high-ranking posts. It is unspokenly assumed by the power structure that they, black men, had their chance, their clear-cut opportunity, including special recognition and fame, and yet they did not lighten the welfare rolls, nor teach their constitutes self-sufficiency, a better attitude, or respect for government. Instead, they had become hooked on a cycle of dependency, crisscrossing 2 and 3 generations, sometimes in the same household. They had no guaranteed loyalty to any particular party or candidate and were insatiable for free services and benefits. Black men know by now that the government is incapable of regulating laws to solve social problems such as racism. This is a hard reality. They had not been able to love or legislate racism away. Being a black man politician, once slippery and fluid, has now frozen into a solid block of icy refusals for everything they suggest as a help out blacks idea. They had come from the pulpits and the schools, but they are denouncing their involvement and retiring to the private sector to have some peace. 6. Joined ethnic organizations. Throngs of black men filled with the new thrilling desire to be pro-black joined or created unique organizations for blacks, only so they could come together to celebrate their newly acquired acceptance. These were black men who were decidedly too militant in their thinking to join what they viewed as a weak, Jelly Roll, Uncle Tom factions such as the NAACP or SCLC, who were quite moderate by comparison. Those black men sought out groups with strong masculine influence which contained activities allowing them to vent their frustration by addressing their grievances in positive action. A few signed up with the Black Panther Party, a notoriously defiant group consisting of young men who weren't afraid to retaliate against white police agitators whom they said invaded their neighborhoods, harassing the residents. The Panthers were indicative of the growing impatience of the black men. Their terroristic threats against the U.S. government helped furnish the emotional fuel needed for white women to sign up for gun and rifle training, allegedly to protect themselves from black men who might somehow invade the suburbs. The Black Panthers made military training and vigorous guerrilla warfare the main thrust of their organization. This included weaponry, self-defense, drilling, surveillance, and protective services for their communities. They developed a 10-point program outlining their demands called the Black Panther Manifesto. They claimed their members were level-headed and almost drug-free, and they tested the right of citizens to bear arms by marching around openly with high-powered rifles slung over their shoulders. The Panthers fell into budget problems and were trapped into accepting some of the free-flowing anti-poverty money being poured into African American communities across the country. The raw bravery compressed into their units created large numbers of loose cannon egos eager to make their mark and prove their greatness. Their clumsy military notions and faulty logistics landed them in many confrontations with the law, whom they called pigs. After many internal clashes, outside conspiracies, and bloodshed from brutal police attacks, they disbanded. Prior to their end, they decided to integrate their ranks to include white radical liberationists and change their policy from anti-racism to a class struggle, the poor against the rich. All of the black men heading up the Panthers retired in shame or embarrassment, but the Panthers made an impressive sight in their black tams and red and black uniforms. They provided many black men with an outlet to practice leadership and obedience, gave them a home base, a place to belong, and a chance to confirm their identity as strong, brave warriors always ready to die for their cause. They should have been ready to live for it. Their tragedy was in using all their energies to be combative and abandoning their original precepts. They couldn't stay unified, but they made awkward attempts to involve children in their activities, to teach and train them for a war they were confident was being waged by their oppressor, the white power structure. The black college campuses were alive and bursting with student protests. Other black men opted to join the Nation of Islam, a stable-appearing religious organization who called themselves Black Muslims. They were most powerfully rooted in Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, and New York. The Muslims eliminated any concepts that God was white, gave up their slave name and received an X, refrained from eating pork, formed black-owned businesses, respected black women, and obeyed moral codes. They offered black men a chance to be independent, said they wanted separation from whites, and taught the black man that his real God was black, named Allah, and that their leader was his last messenger to the people. Charges of racial hatred directed towards white and mumblings about black supremacy frightened off many blacks and kept them from joining the group. The Muslims were against social integration and strived to teach black men to be independent and clean living. Others, slightly popular but not as prominent as the aforementioned organizations, were the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Students for a Democratic Society, Congress of Racial Equality, Uhuru Movement, Group on Advanced Leadership, Freedom Now Party, United Black Nationalists of America, the New Pan-African Movement, the National Urban League, Committee on Racial and Religious Progress. There were many local community-based organizations not listed here. 7. The arts. Black men choosing the arts as painters, poets, actors, or entertainers enjoyed a brief but fertile period of special notoriety and success. Black art became avant-garde. Such anger had never been expressed in any medium. Following was the African clothing, boldly colored fabrics, head wraps, kufis, flags, buttons, clenched fist items, sandals, wood carvings, statues, and all kinds of cultural paraphernalia for the masses. Black men sported pullover shirts called dashikis, allegedly fashioned after African garb but really manufactured by the Japanese. They took African names, some too difficult to pronounce, making the titles short-lived. After a few years, fashion trends changed. The dashiki faded, they got haircuts, put their shoes and socks back on, and got a job someplace. Few pieces of their original artwork is available today. Many of their poetic rantings served to gain enough attention from elite white liberals to get them invited to their social affairs for readings. Many times they proved the entertainment for the evening and many times they provided the entertainment for the evening and permitted whites to relieve themselves of some of their capitalistic guilt by sitting quietly in rapt attention while a black man stood on the podium blaming, cursing, and insulting whites for their racist, genocidal behaviors. It was a weird set, but many black men provided this special service to interested whites. For a while, many of their poems, plays, or short stories were included in African American history classes on the university level, but were restructured somewhat. Black men who selected the entertainment industry got an opportunity to act on television in a few minor roles and briefly starred in many new wave black themed movies, mostly about drugs, thugs, prostitution, pimps, illegal activities, outlandish monsters, kung fu, or sweet daddy roles. Black women were the first allowed to penetrate television, and it was later that black men garnered roles which were portrayed them as intelligent, contributing human beings in realistic, viable positions. Many turned to comedy, singing, and dancing. Black men created and named many popular dances, mimicked nationwide. They wrote and performed songs and musical pieces and were featured on television, on rock and roll shows or specials. Their tunes made the rhythm and blues charts, and they enjoyed immense popularity, which were grossly underpaid for. Much of their material was stolen or purchased for only a few dollars because they needed the money or opted to get their work published, even if not owned by themselves. But they were spectacular when on stage and screen. They emerged a few major black-owned record companies who tried to control their section of the industry, black music. They worked hard, but it was the white board members of the music industry who decided who would be promoted, have their records distributed, or played on the radio. Whites were in charge of exposure, marketing. Nevertheless, black men sung about love, finding love, lost love, mighty love, wrong love, hot love, needed love, sunshine, bushes, and birds. Anything they could rhyme and set to music. They appealed to their lovelorn listeners and melodized every aspect of heartbreak. They saw no need to sing about their African roots, but they enjoyed the success of being what blacks referred to as nigger rich, which is a temporary conditional period of having control of large sums of money and material possessions, mostly by those who are not used to having any. Many of these now old-timers have tried to hang on, clinging to their standard subjects and tunes, but most have disappeared from the popular charts. Some of their music is being used as the background sound for other artists who talk poems. 8. Drugs, prison, and society dropouts. Naturally, not all black men picked sensible lifestyles grounded in legality. Some got stung out on drugs like heroin, which was mostly popular at that time. A few dabbled in LSD, a hallucinatory drug used speed, or smoked pot, marijuana. The more elite snorted cocaine in their private sets. Everybody experimented with drugs, but some got addicted and declined in productivity, becoming the street animals foraging for money to get their fix. Black men used heroin intravenously or snorted it, roughing out the terrible stomach pains to get to the high. The more industrious ones sold the drug itself, had big fine hogs, elaborate wardrobes, hostels of fancy women, black and white, and lived surrounded by other black men who served as their flunkies. They had flashy jewelry and sponsored many immoral parties. These black men considered the black men not involved in the slick life as square or green. They made little permanent progress despite all the money they handled, as they were not the least bit concerned about preserving black culture, pride, or social advancement. They lived in a gritty underground world of their own. They dragged many wayward black women into their mire of filth. Yet these were the types of black men portrayed as heroes or role models for younger black males in what the critics termed as trendy blaxploitation films. The pimps and drugs-dealing black men were featured as mighty cool, sharp dressers who did whatever they wanted to do, regardless of how the man, white police, felt. Their behavior and fashions were imitated by adult black men of the time who tried to dress, walk, or talk like the drug dealing pimps on the screen. Still others tried to get away with committing various crimes like robbery, shoplifting, thuggery, shooting, or murdering people. 99% of whom were black. Many got caught and were awarded stiff prison sentences for their errors in crime. They received jail sentences far outweighing the nature of their crimes, but their tentative guilt and absence of strong legal counsel landed them in prison for many years, many to never be heard from again. They rioted in prison to express their support for the civil rights movement on the streets, or organized against prison mismanagement of human life, mainly black male inmates. Black men studied religion in prison and chose the black Muslim doctrine because of their disappointment with the white-controlled judicial system. Their absence from the community in great and large numbers prevented them from being contributing supportive workers, husbands, and fathers. Prison was much worse in those days, according to respondents. Their aberrant behavior helped to portray and identify black men as dangerous savages who must be isolated from the working public. Their vast numbers in jail implied they were violent lawbreakers and made others suspicious of a whole lot of them. Some were shot, killed, or unmercifully beaten by police when caught doing wrong. There was not much interest in black men in prison, and many blacks felt they got what they deserved for breaking the law. Black men police seemed extremely hard on black men perpetrators to prove to their white co-officers their dedication to law and order, no matter what color. 9 and 10. Developed a lifestyle rooted in social and sexual integration. These black men involved themselves with seeking ways to integrate socially and be the first Negro to accomplish a certain goal. They decided that it doesn't matter what color a person is, and all they wanted was a chance to prove themselves and to be left alone to do their own thing. They became the regular, hard-working, apolitical Joe Blow or John Doe. They got a job, got married, reared a family, went to church, enjoyed an occasional night out, went on vacation, voted, and did the best they could to be unnoticed and fit in with society as best they thought could, or so they thought. They kept a ready smile for whites, even if they hated them in their private circle of friends. They did their best to please their bosses and taught their children not to be prejudiced. They might support the NAACP and believed in much of Martin Luther King Jr.'s program. They celebrated all holidays and were not concerned with preserving black culture other than attending family reunions. They exerted no effort to identify themselves as anything other than colored or Negro. It doesn't matter in that way. They coined the saying, "The good Lord made us all." They sent their children to church to pray to a white God, brought their daughters white dolls, and watched their sons play cowboys and Indians, the good guys and the bads. He hung pictures and portraits of Caucasians in his home, mainly John or Bobby Kennedy. The Jesus picture on his wall seemed to have eyes that followed you around the room, no matter where you stood. If a black man was included, it was Dr. Martin Luther King after his death. Otherwise, it was okay with him if white families appeared on his yearly calendar that hung visibly in his home 365 days year after year. And his full-color Bible contained several pages of holy white people in various settings in the Holy Land. Many felt at odds with the mothers of their children and were not on hand to help raise or train them. And when they did see their children, they did not talk about being black, Africa, culture, or what it takes to be a good black man. They expressed no opposition to what their sons were being taught in school or at home. They left child rearing mostly to the mothers, the school, and the church. They felt no compulsion or obligation to reinforce old, outdated, unimportant black history stories. They themselves had long since disregarded all that black stuff. Things have not changed much. It was during this period that black men planted the idea that they, black men, wanted to be judged and accepted on their individual merits and not counted with or included with other black men. They did not realize that psychologically that this mode of thinking would isolate and separate them even further from identifying with each other or acknowledging their brotherhood rooted in coming from the same background and nationality. They commenced to do everything they could to convince whites that they were different and not like the rest of them. They made a public call for disavowalment of each other and released all bonds and claimed no connection or responsibility for the actions and behaviors of other black men. The house Negro and the field Negro had come to their final parting. On examination of the 10 major choices that broadly describe the lifestyle sections made by black men 30 to 45 years ago, it is clear that few of their choices fostered retention of black culture nor reinforcement of African American values or traditions. No guidelines were developed or substantiated from one generation to the next. It is incredulous for their blackness or to be conscious of what their foreparents endured, since he did not detailed in other chapters. The brief conspectus is only a primary dissection to demonstrate how each lifestyle choice the black man made 30 years ago moved him further and further away from opportunities to establish a definite positive identity for himself, and he has been floundering since that time, trying to settle on the desperation of who he is, and everybody else is waiting to find out too. It is time to look at the original tactics used to manipulate him into forgetting his identity. During his initial enslavement without the Geneva Convention, the slave master used a 2-level process to force the black man into developing amnesia so he could be a tool for labor. The first level consisted of 1. Physical trauma. A ploy implemented by long-term uncomfortable transport by ship across the ocean in cramped, overcrowded, inhumane corridors below deck where he was stacked like sardines and left to sleep in his own excrement. 2. Disorientation. The ships took him to a land geographically unfamiliar to him, containing foliage, wildlife, and a climate he was not accustomed to, and it was far, far away, many days and nights. 3. Hostility. He was treated badly, disrespected, rough-handled, chained, and rendered helpless, and then forced to watch the brutalization of his mother, his woman, and his children. The second level, a modern, devastating one, consisted of he was prevented from speaking his own language. Languages are sounds used to transmit and receive information, to reflect the intensity of ideas, express history, and describe things indigenous to a particular people. Prohibiting his language stopped black men from communicating with each other and broke ties. 5. His name was changed. The slave master insisted on renaming his charges according to his own whims, according to their given names. It was important to impress upon the black man that he was no longer the same person, as he was given a new identity in a new land with new status as a slave. 6. The slave master abolished his religion. His God concept was taken from him to prevent him from receiving comfort or calling on his own Lord for help. His God was replaced with the white man's God, another white man who was more powerful and currently in charge of him. Religious authorities was redistributed by changing it from black to white. This is not new information. Practically all black men know that their ancestors were stripped of their names and religion while in slavery. But the reclaiming of these two important identity features has never been paramount enough for him to address the issues on a national agenda. The question becomes, how can he reestablish his own culture or define his own identity while still clutching the European labels forced on him during his enslavement? It is irrational thinking for the black man to contribute to bellyache about his real identity without investigating what his real identity was before he was enslaved and returning to it. The only part of his cultural tradition by the slave master allowed him to keep and maintain was sport and play under the auspices of singing, dancing, games and sport competition, making jokes, and playing the fool. The only part of his cultural traditions the slave master allowed him to keep and maintain was sport and play under the auspice of 1. Singing and dancing, 2. Games and sport competitions, 3. Making jokes and playing the fool. These are the 3 components that are now looked upon as skills that black men specialize in to a fault. They are activities for which he is best known and most sought after for today. He is acclaimed and expert in these categories, and they gain him recognition, earn him the most money, and make him the most admired. He can be found exhibiting these attributes for a fee or for free in front of whatever audience is available. He is accustomed in certain circles to being called upon to do his little dance, tell his little joke, or demonstrate his physical proficiency in some sort of challenge. He takes pride in being singled out or requested to show off his special talents. He is sometimes known for being the ambassador of clowning, the chairman of laughing at his own self, and the president of general tomfoolery. He delights in some people referring to him by saying, "That nigga is crazy," or "You are so funny," or "You crazy." Sadly, when he responds, he is. He thinks that it is all in fun, but the biggest joke is on him because it keeps other adults from taking him seriously. It is futile to convince him of this. These actions proliferate a behavior he perfected during slavery to stay on his master's good side. Unfortunately, this behavior is also part of his identity today. Currently, the black man refuses to give up the names the slave masters saddled their family with. So his identity remains clouded by names connected to other nationalities from all over Europe. He insists that his name is now his own, and as long as he keeps his European name, he will continue to grow away from the so-called black culture he claims he is so proud of and desires to return to. Another unique aspect of his name problem is that black men, especially those claiming to be versed and trained in psychology, have not investigated or reported on the significance of the black man carrying a white man's name or how it affects his mental status. Black male psychologists are remiss as scientists due to their collective refusal to bring attention to the negative psychodynamics inherent in taking a man's name and religion from him. The black man's ego derives its energy and motivation from identifiable points of basic reference, such as by the name one is called by or answers to. They have failed to address the virtual impossibility of the black man reclaiming his cultural roots while maintaining and protecting the very symbols and systems used against him to control his body and mind during slavery. The slave system was a very well-planned and thought-out process which contained no useless motions or insignificant techniques. So if the main possessions taken from the black man was his name and his religion, obviously they are the most crucial elements that have the greatest influence on a man's mentality, strength, and confidence. Black men use the following excuses for holding on to their European names. A name is not important. It's what you do that counts. 2. It doesn't matter what they call me. Just give me a chance. 3. Some are too embarrassed or ashamed to announce to their friends, family, or white counterparts that they are reclaiming their own historically black names. 4. They don't want to go through the rejection or mockery from family or friends, especially from their mothers and their women, who may refuse to refer them by their new name and make mockery of them. 5. They think that changing their names will be disrespectful to their parents who gave them the name at birth. Possibly they are even named after a now deceased popular relative. 6. The idea of informing their church, club, co-workers, or children and mailmen of their new name is an overwhelming thought to them. They are apprehensive about the resistance they expect to encounter from all these groups. 7. They don't want to cause a problem on their jobs by informing their white bosses or the personnel office of their new name or why they changed it. 8. They are emotionally connected to their name, having been taught that it is their Christian name. 9. They don't know how to change their name and think it will ruin their credit or cause them problems with the IRS. 10. They don't know any African or Arabic names. What they don't know is that American laws do not prevent or oppose an individual from changing their name. It is relatively simple and inexpensive to do. A name change does not interfere with records on file at the credit bureau or post office or library. All one has to do is inform all the people he does business with. Changing one's name will not cause problems with the IRS because the Social Security number remains the same, as does the driver's license number, voter registration, or any other numerical code or symbol connected to the individual. The only change that takes place is a psychological one, inside the black man himself. A part of his self-pride returns as he signs and answers to the name of his forefathers. Correcting his name serves as a reminder, a bond, and attachment with his glorious pre-slavery ancestors. Public proof of the black man's intentional disconnection and subsequent rejection of his black name was internationally demonstrated when famous author Alex Haley presented his Roots book in the late 1970s. Haley, an expert writer and historian, embarked on a lifelong project of tracing his personal family tree all the way back to Africa. In 1976 through 77, he delivered up his findings in both books and movies form, for which he gained worldwide acclaim. The movie Roots achieved the highest black viewership in the history of television. Haley's study served to provoke other African Americans into tracing their own family histories. All well and good. But what happened after Haley completed his research exemplifies and validates charges against the black man for denying his past and rejecting himself. Mr. Haley spent all that time and energy, invested a tidy sum of money, and became consumed day and night for many years with his project to trace his family to their pre-slavery existence. He wrote vividly about his findings and then allowed them to be cinematized as a documentary starring major black actors. One of the most moving, heart-rendering scenes was when Alex Haley finally meets the living proof of his lineage. He traced his source to Kunta Kinte. Kinte was his family's real name. Haley's book depicted scenarios where Kunta Kinte was forced to give up his name and religion by the slave masters who captured him. Despite all this proof, Alex Haley returned to America as Alex Haley and still today answers to the name of Alex Haley. How can that be? Here is one black man in America who knows for an actual fact that his real name is Kinte and not Haley, yet continues, after gaining full knowledge of his past, to hold on to the name he knows was forced on his family during slavery. This issue has never come up, nor has he ever been questioned about it. Alex Haley set a very bad example for black youth because he was in a prime position to demonstrate the act of reclaiming his real family name. It would have impacted on black youth and black adults all over the country and reminded them that the names they have are not their own. But Haley did not accept his real name, and other black men did not think it odd. He blew an opportunity to set a precedence on the importance of re-embracing black kinship for freedom. Haley has also continued to practice the Christian faith after finding out that his family's original religion was Islam. By doing all this, he is a perfect example of how the black man, even on discovery with absolute proof of his real identity, refuses to reclaim his own. Haley's finding survives as one of the most important historical studies that blacks have ever had access to. However, his findings have not made one iota of difference in what blacks believe in or what they do. His documentation should have, under normal intellectual awareness, been required reading for discussion by every black child every year that they attend school. but it is not. And roots has all but been forgotten. And the beat goes on. Toby survived. The black man has incessantly failed at establishing a sensible, dignified, respectable identity for himself because he has been trying to do this without taking into account his special history of coming to America and the fact that he was not a voluntary immigrant. He will routinely fail to recognize his black culture as long as he keeps trying to mix slavery and freedom to establish his identity or come up with a workable plan out of those two opposing forces. Without taking back their names and their religion, they will never reconnect with the past. Any other plan will continue to be a waste of time and end in failure as usual. He must restore his own image in his brain. Caucasian boys grow up surrounded by and in some cases bombarded by the accomplishments of his ancestors. The white male child knows from a very early age that he is most important because nearly everywhere he looks, he sees an image of himself. Every holiday, every celebration, every major event evolves around him and the people who look and act like him. All the history he studies throughout his entire life is about his forefathers who look like him. White parents would never consider ever raising their children completely surrounded exclusively by religious images, holidays, or historical feats that featured only African Americans, Hispanics, or Asians. Never in a million years. But the black man has allowed his children to be reared on a steady diet of pictures, symbols, and information about other nationalities, and he must be held accountable for creating the damaging climate of destruction his brethren are now experiencing due to his blindness. It is his fault that the black man's survival is in peril. He did not lead his tribe in the right direction, and now that they are lost, he wants to blame others for their bewilderment. Another way black men attempt to reclaim their culture is by joining a club or organization such as the Masons or a fraternity. These are the most popular units which black men think provides them with a special identity linked to their black past. The Masonic orders have a very involved set of secret signs, symbols, and practices allegedly known only to the brothers in the club. These days, there are no such secrets. However, the internal workings and rituals are so complicated that they will not be fully divulged here. Loosely, the Masons, Elks, or Shriners are actually social type agencies which host many elite affairs and generally raise money to donate to service agency or selected charities. They do good work and have a good time doing it. They wear identifying uniforms such as tall fezes with tassels, have special jewelry such as rings, pendants, or lapel pins imprinted with their emblems or other symbols relating to their secret union. They have intense rituals for admission, hand and finger signs that supposedly help them negotiate in court or when stranded on the highway in distress. Their premise has something to do with biblical characters like Hiram Abiff, trying to get somebody up out of the grave whose body is already decomposed. They have cornerstones, temples, and pyramids, along with hot desert sand and swords, half moons, and rulers. They reportedly earn certain degrees of knowledge by submitting themselves to a few internally devised ceremonies wherein they receive bits and pieces of information at each step. They pay hefty dues, are respected for their unity, and meet periodically in groups consisting of black males only. This is a good aspect of their membership because it places black men routinely alone together to talk amongst themselves. The second most popular organization black men take pride in are fraternities, which they usually join up with in college and retain their members throughout the rest of their adult lives. Fraternity means brotherhood, they say, and black men who belong to a fraternity are considered prime stock. They identify themselves by using Greek language and symbols for the names of their group. This is supposedly remotely similar to hieroglyphics of Egypt and the Nile River in Africa. Fraternities represent another attempt by black men to formulate him an identity achieved by going through certain rites and rituals designed to gain him acceptance into the brotherhood of men. They call their group, for example, Alpha Phi Alpha, Kappa Alpha Psi, Psi Beta Sigma, or Omega Psi Phi. Their female counterparts have similarly sounding Greek words to identify their participation in the sorority. Fraternities have very lofty and honorable goals for their slogans. They set high standards for membership and vow to work to serve their communities and to better humanity on all fronts. They have their associated symbols, which are marketed on caps, hats, t shirts, sweaters, patches, rings, ties, etc. The items with their logos are nearly infinite. They have special colors assigned to each frat and are exceptionally proud of their affiliation. They go through a process called pledging, during which they may be required to dress alike, overcome some daring predicament, become servants to the senior members, or prove their endurance by standing in a certain spot or completing a difficult feat. Frat brothers have become a bit more brazen in modern times and they have lost some of their class and clout, but they are still considered respectable and special. They put on a good show during their stomping routines, which is a kind of dance and military drill blended together and may feature costumes or wooden canes. They compete with each other to determine who had the best audio, visual, and creating stomping routine. Part of their initiation is to prove they can survive the ceremonial rites of passage. Examples of the rites for fraternities and sororities are 1. Tar and feathering. They participate in this rite in the nude and actually get tarred and feathered a little, which is supposed to be symbolic of the slave's experience after being recaptured from running away. 2. The meal. They must eat some type of slop or a dish simulated to represent food the slave was forced to eat to survive. 3. Walking through fire. This is supposed to be reminiscent of his walking over a hot desert to civilization someplace in Africa. Actual fire is used and the enlistees must prove their sincerity by walking through the fire, sometimes barefoot. 4. Being lost. Sometimes new recruits are left in a strange place or unfamiliar part of town and must find their way back home with no map or directional tools. 5. Passing food from mouth to mouth. This symbology is related to the slave's need to share some of the same food, often off the same plate. It may be typified by two black men eating off the same bone to emulate the act of sharing everything with the brother. Each initiation is designed to promote each member towards self-reliance. Many African Egyptian references are used in these pledging ceremonies, such as the Sphinx, the crescent of the pyramids, with charter goals like service, high moral character, sharing, building, scholarship, and respect. They are an honorable clique to belong to. Their kinship is recognized nationwide, and they try to keep in contact at their annual conferences or periodic local meetings. Fraternities have produced many confident lawyers, doctors, businessmen, politicians, and leaders. They have a clearly defined identity earned by accomplishing goals that serve as rites of passage for transformation into responsible adults. It is unfortunate that such noble intentions are tainted by them trying to emulate the sufferings of their slavery-bound ancestors instead of their free and powerful forefathers who never arrived on American shores. What they have done is adopting a confusing blend of European, African, and African American historical events and use their conclusions to create rites based on all three stories. Perhaps one day they will explain their reasoning for this. Their rituals contain certain leaps in logic that undermine any real significance they might gain from slavery or pre-slavery existence of black men of old. Black men fraternity brothers retain the slave master's name and are known to be good Americans.